Anne by K.B. HURST, with special guest Dr. Creepen. Anne stepped off the train, and at first glance, I barely recognized her as my older sister. Anne recognized me immediately, waving in my direction, a shy grin spreading slowly across her face. I noticed her baggy jeans, which were too large, as though she had randomly selected them, as they didn't even match her frame. She had an equally oversized rain jacket around her tiny body, and over her shoulder hung a heavy-looking bag that I thought, for sure, would cause her to topple over at any second. Life hadn't been good to Anne in recent years. Her skin was thin, pale, and yellow-tinged, and it hung over her skinny body. While she covered her body the best she could with her oversized jacket, there were traces of scars on her arms as they peeked out from her sleeves. Years of drugs had left her corpse-like, and it showed all over her, especially in her eyes. They were strikingly dark blue ones, but now they were colorless, and under them hung 2 dark moons. It had been 2 years since I had last seen her. My parents paid for her recent stint at rehab, and being almost Easter, they wanted their daughter home, safe and sound. I was studying at Northwestern, and it was the last day of classes before spring break, so my mom asked me if I could pick up my sister at the train station. I complied because I was already on my way home, and so this is where I found myself on a murky Chicago evening. I tried to shut out the last memory I had of her lying on the bathroom floor as white foam escaped her mouth while her eyes rolled back toward the back of her head. With every spasm from her seizure, she appeared in limbo, as though she were in 2 worlds. My parents sent her the following day to get help, but before the ink was dry on the paperwork to the rehab facility, Anne left the hospital, disappearing into thin air before anybody could help her. A month earlier, she appeared back into our lives on a rainy winter night. My father answered the phone, and he handed the phone to my mother as they both cried, relieved she was alive. My sister Anne was asking for help, and it wasn't being forced upon her. My phone rang, startling me, and the sound echoed like shattering glass. It was my mother checking in to see if Anne had arrived. I answered my phone. Mom, I got her. She's just stepped off the train. Mom? Hello? Sorry, Mom? I can't hear you. Look, I'll call you back once we get to the car. I had been met with more static, so I just hung up. As she stood facing me, and I looked into her eyes. As we stood there facing one another, I was unsure if I should hug her, which was customary when seeing someone you love after 3 years. But something felt strange, and I awkwardly stared at her instead. Julie, she finally said, grinning at me. I'm so happy to see you. She looked at me, and still neither one of us moved. Her eyes went directly towards a necklace I had around my neck that she had given me years ago. It was half of a heart with a rose painted on it, with the word sis written on it. She had the same one, the other half, that spelled ters, and together would spell sisters, only she wasn't wearing hers now. Oh, look, you still have yours, she said, looking at it with a glimmer of hope on her face. She didn't mention where hers had gone to, but I imagined that when she was living on the streets, it had been given to someone to feed her drug habit. We stood there still smiling at each other, and I doubted we even knew what to do. We were strangers, stranded in an emotional ocean of waves, the good and the bad times flashing through my mind, hoping for something to call us back to shelter. We once could read each other's thoughts, and now I couldn't tell what she was thinking even with a smile planted on her pale, gaunt face. I wanted it to feel normal again, and our meeting to feel natural, the way you should feel around someone you love. I just stood as though we were viewing a stranger, because it had been so long since I had any real relationship with her. The drug stole her away from me long before she disappeared from my life. I missed you, I said, as sincerely as I could. My tone sounded forced, but Anne didn't seem to notice. Ugh, I'm starving. Why don't we go get a bite to eat? She asked, and I nodded. We found a coffee shop in the station that served deli sandwiches, so we went inside, and I ordered Anne some food. My sister sat in a booth while I ordered, but she never took the painted grin off her face. She watched me, and only me, while I stood in line to get our food and drinks, and her eyes followed me with each step as I moved to our table. I didn't know what to get. They were limited, so I got us both ham and Swiss on a croissant. I got them to put mustard on the side because that's how you always liked it, but if it isn't okay, there's a mayo packet too, I said, putting the plate in front of her. Hey, how have you been? How have Mom and Dad been since Smoopy passed away? Smoopy, not Snoopy, because when I was little I couldn't pronounce Snoopy, but was my favorite dog on television. So he was called Smoopy because of my wrong pronunciation. He was our hound dog that after 18 beautiful years died. It was a long time for any dog to live, but he had always been extraordinary in every way. When Anne and I were children, he would walk us to school, and then he would find his way back home. Smoopy was our little protector, and we both loved him deeply. I had no clue how Anne would have even known. She wasn't allowed calls in rehab, and it had only happened 2 days ago. Arrangements to pick up Anne were made days in advance, and no one had spoken to her since. While I thought it was strange, I just shrugged it off. I'm okay. Dad's pretty broken up about it. I think Mom's a bit relieved. He was very sick towards the end, and he had constantly had to be cleaned up after because of it. I'm a bit down on my food, but Anne only made a motion to pick up her food, and then she sat it back down with a sad expression on her face. I want to tell you I'm sorry about everything. I'm sorry about your car. My mind flashed back to the night in question. I had just thought a used vehicle, a nice little red Ford Focus, with my savings at my job tutoring junior high school students in math, when I was awoken at 2 a.m. by screaming and yelling. I awoke to find my mother sitting on the floor in the hallway that led to the front door of her old colonial home, while my father was screaming at Anne. How could you do this? You're going to rehab tonight or jail. You choose! Dad had screamed. I recall my sister finally realizing I was standing in the hallway behind my mother, and she looked at me and started to laugh. My father, not thinking, smacked her across the face, and my mother screamed at him. Anne had begun screaming and yelling in retaliation, hitting my father in the chest, and then ran into our downstairs bathroom and locked the door. It was precisely when I saw the police lights outside our house, and I slowly walked to the front door. When I looked outside, I saw my new car on its side. She had wrecked it into the giant oak tree in our neighbor's front yard. My mother was sobbing and kept apologizing repeatedly, but it wasn't her fault. It was my sister's fault. The unapologetic, selfish drug addict that she had become with no thoughts of anyone but herself, except how she would score her next fix. I looked at my father's face as the cops came to the door, and my father let them in a while. My mother tried to get Anne to open the bathroom door. After some time, they broke down the door and found her lying on the floor with white foam escaping her mouth, and her eyes rolled back in her head. She had overdosed, and that was the last image I had of my sister. It's okay, I responded mechanically, trying to detach myself from the painful memory. No, it isn't, sis. I was a jerk. You were sick, Anne, I responded, remembering what the pamphlet said I had read on the drug addiction, how it's considered a disease that's incurable but treatable. as if that was supposed to make me feel better. Anne didn't touch her food. Instead, she stood up, grabbing her book bag. Sis, I don't feel so well all of a sudden. I need to go to the restroom. I nodded, and as I watched her leave, I finished my sandwich. Some time had went by, and when I didn't see Anne return, I took it upon myself to get her a box for her food, and I put it in a to-go bag. I grabbed my purse and coat and walked towards the public restrooms. There was something off about the train station that night. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was nearly empty. I found it odd considering that it usually was bustling with hundreds of people. I noticed from one of the doors that strange and thick snow had begun to fall. It fell in large flakes and got heavier by the second, slowly covering up the station's windows. It looked as though we may get stuck there if we didn't head home, so I ran inside the ladies' room for Anne. Anne? Anne, we need to go now. There's a bad snowstorm, and I'm afraid that traffic will be crazy. I didn't see her in the bathroom, but I heard something from one of the stalls. There were precisely 10 in a row with 5 sinks in front of them. It was clean for a public restroom and nothing out of the ordinary. I walked towards the stall that I heard the noise coming from and knocked on the door. Anne? I didn't hear my sister. I just heard heavy breathing, but Anne didn't say a word. I went down to make sure that it was her and peeked at the shoes under the door. If it wasn't, I'd apologize to whoever was there, but I recognized those baggy jeans and her keds. As I stood up, I noticed she was looking at me through the crack in the door. I jumped back, startled, because there was something about her stare. Her eye was yellow and red in appearance, and my first thought was that she was on something. How could someone's eye just suddenly appear that way? I took a deep breath and stepped away from the door. Okay, Anne, we need to go now, I said as sternly as I could. I'm not feeling well, she said in a small voice that I could barely recognize. What's wrong? I asked, slowly lingering outside the stall door. He's here, but I can't leave, she said as slowly as the door began to open. I knew she must have taken some kind of drug because she was acting erratically. After everything we had been through, my parents were going to be so disappointed. What the hell are you talking about, Anne? He's here. He's here to collect me. He's here to collect me. Who is here? She kept her head down and her eyes were hidden by her dark hair. He likes to hurt me, Julie. Please make it stop. My mind went into 1,000 directions, and I bent down in front of her as she sat with her clothes on, just sitting on the toilet seat. Her book bag was still over her shoulder, and I looked at her trying to understand. How does he hurt you? Who is this man? Is he here now in the train station? I rapidly fired question after question. He's inside me, and all around me. He won't leave me, although I've tried to cut him out. Anne held onto her wrist to me and revealed deep scars running up her wrist. So deep, the spot remained thick and still reddish, as if it had only happened recently. I had had enough. I went to grab her book bag to see what she had inside it. I bet whatever drug she was taking, it was still inside there, and I could find more and flush it. I had so hoped she was doing better, but obviously not. I was annoyed, and so I reached out to jerk the bag off her shoulder, but she backed up away from me in a fast motion. It was so fast it startled me by her strength and quick fastness. And then, suddenly, the lights in the bathroom went out. Darkness surrounded us, and I began to feel as though something was very wrong. I felt for my phone to use the flashlight, and when I finally got it to turn on, Anne was nowhere to be found. I breathed in an anxiety-ridden breath as panic began to set in. I could feel my hands shaking and my fears quaking from within me. Every worst possible scenario flipped through my mind, like pages on a book. I managed to find the light switch and flicked it, but the lights didn't come on. I was even more concerned about a power outage and a snowstorm and a giant train station. And I felt more urgency to get out. I had to get out of this place. Anne? I asked, hoping to feel my sister nearby so I wouldn't have to be alone in the darkness. When I was a child, I used to get scared of the dark and would get up in the middle of the night and get in my sister's bed. She would hum lullabies to comfort me so I didn't have to feel afraid. Anne was my big sister, some 5 years old and old enough to make me feel safe. She made me feel better, so I didn't have to worry about our mother. There was often an annoyance at night when I would wake up my mom, but my sister was never angry with me. Anne would hug me tight in the blankets until I was no longer afraid. She was older, but we shared an intense bond. "Julie, there's nothing to be afraid of," she would tell me. "Everything has to go to sleep at night, even the boogeyman." "But I can't see in the dark," I would tell her. She would then get out her unicorn lamp that reflected stars on her bedroom ceiling. I would lay in her bed, staring up at the stars until I fell asleep. The reality of my current situation hit me hard like a fist in the gut. I took a deep, panicked breath and searched around the dark stall. I couldn't hear anything except my breathing and one of the sinks. Water continued to drip slowly from the faucet in one loud, almost pulsing drip, drip, drip. For any signs of Anne, fearing she may have overdosed on whatever was making her so erratic. I turned on my phone's flashlight toward the ground, using it to shine a light under every single stall, but Anne was gone. I continued to look around me, and then stopped in front of the mirror as it frightened me. My worst fears seemed to cultivate themselves one after another as I looked towards the bathroom door. She must have exited the bathroom when the lights went out, and so I found myself alone. A chill seemed to hit the back of my neck, causing me to flinch as I walked quickly towards the door. I opened the bathroom door to look out, but the entire train station was empty, except for me. The lights were out, except for emergency lights that blinked near one of the terminal stations. A large window went up to the station's ceiling, and it was now completely covered in snow. I looked inside my purse to find keys and a parking ticket, and when I reached down, it was no longer around my shoulder. Fuck. It had to have fallen off my shoulder when I was with Anne. Just as I was about to go back in the bathroom, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around to see a man dressed in a janitor's uniform, and he just stared at me.
"Hey, you lost?"
When he opened his mouth, his teeth were yellow and carried with them gut-wrenching halitosis. Backing up closer to the restroom, I looked at him, unsure as to what he meant. "I was looking for my sister," I managed to say. The man just looked at me, as though he were looking through me. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, but his skin was pale and his hair was white as snow. There's something otherworldly about him.
You smell like honey.
He looked at me with a skin-tight grin curled up upon his face, once again revealing those yellow teeth. A responsive whisper barely left my lips. What?
I'll savor every inch of you. I'll devour what is left, leaving no trace you were ever born.
Running into the bathroom, shutting the door, and locking it. I searched for my phone to call the police, but it fell on the floor of the bathroom, and as I struggled to grab it, Julie? Julie. I heard my name as someone was whispering behind me. Anne? Is that you? It had to be her. Who else? Oh, thank God, I sighed in relief. Are you ready to go now? I looked over towards the sound of her voice, and all at once felt perplexed. Anne was crouched under one of the sinks, and her tiny frame curled in a ball. She looked frozen in fear for some reason, and I could have sworn I was going crazy. Anne, I slowly approached her. There's no one in the train station except you and me. There's a creepy man outside the bathroom. He said some bizarre things to me. I think we need to call the police. Police? She asked. I bent over and crouched in front of her as she eyed me from behind her black hair. And before I could touch her, she got up quickly. We have to get you out of here. We have to get you out of here! We both need to get out of here, I said, and she nodded. I decided not to think about what had happened moments before, but then I crept towards the bathroom door and opened it only a crack to see if the man was still out there. I didn't see him, and I felt grateful that he had disappeared. I turned towards Anne to tell her to come with me, but she was no longer standing behind me. I figured she must have backed away from me, fearing to go outside after I relayed that there was a potential danger. Rather than worry, I tried dialing 911. I turned towards my sister, who I could see was standing away from me now, with her back towards me near the bathroom wall. Anne, give me your phone. I saw her look into her book bag, and I stood and waited. It isn't... He's gonna find me. He's going to find me. No, he isn't. I walked towards her. Here, let me help you, I said, picking up my cellular phone, turning the flashlight on towards her. When I did, something very odd happened. I moved the light in her direction, but she disappeared before my eyes. I stopped breathing and blinked, looking back into her direction, and there she was again under the sink. How could she have moved so quickly without my seeing her do it? It was impossible. I let out a panicked, audible breath and walked 2 steps in her direction. Anne? What just happened? I didn't get a response. I took a deep breath and walked 2 more steps toward her, and I closed my eyes as I moved the phone's flashlight in her direction. And once again, she disappeared. What the fuck? I knew then something was very wrong. Either I was losing my mind, or I was in a nightmare. I knew I had to get out of there. I didn't care if she was with me or not. Something moved from the corner of my eye. And when I looked in the mirror in front of me, I could see myself, only there was... I looked into the mirror, and to my shock, I could see it inching its way up the wall behind me. I began to pant, and I dropped my phone. I ran towards the bathroom door. Turning to open the door, a creature with yellow piercing eyes stopped me. Its fangs were shiny brown as saliva dripped from its mouth, and the skin around it was yellow and wrinkled, yet everything about this thing was dressed like Anne. It wasn't Anne, though. How could it be? The lights in the bathroom began to flicker on and off like a strobe light as I slowly inched my way in the direction of the floor, covering my head and face as if it could deter this maniacal thing and make it disappear. I could feel it breathing over me. And then it spoke.
Sweet girl, you're so precious. You're so innocent and pure. How sweet you smell.
I instinctively grabbed a hold of a necklace that was around my neck. The one Anne had given me. I held on to it as though I were holding on to her and the way we had been before drugs had taken her life. I held on to it with an inner hope that this demon would spare me. Anne, I said, as her body was thrown to the ceiling of the bathroom. Oh my God! I screamed, barely recognizing my own voice. I heard it. I was laughing now. The walls as it dropped Anne's body to the hard floor. I looked at her, lights flickering, making me feel displaced. I was afraid to move as I began to stand up against the door, frozen. Blood escaped from her skull, and her eyes were lifeless as I went slowly towards her. Before I could grieve, her face shifted, her jaw cracking, spreading a wide, painful grin upon her face. I stood immobilized, watching as this demon began to crawl towards me. That hideous face, scrunched up yellow eyes, blazing, almost glowing in the darkness, like something straight from hell. It crawled towards me, laughter escaping its jaws once more. I heard Anne's voice again. Go, Julie. Go, Julie. Go, Julie. 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 Go from this place. Go from this place. And don't look back. Don't look back. Don't. Changed quickly again, shaking its head back and forth like a wet dog. It attempted its assault on me once more, as it was now clawing at my legs, trying to drag me into the black hole from where it crawled out. It didn't complete its assault upon me, as I saw something twist its head as if someone had grabbed it from behind, and I heard a crack. Leave! Just take me and leave her. It was Anne's voice, booming as it echoed through the bathroom, and the face changed back to my sister for only a moment. You must leave. Perhaps someday you can forgive me. I love you, Julie. I felt her hand touch my face, and tears welled up on both of our faces as I struggled to understand what was happening. The atmosphere changed in the air. There was an immediate electric charge causing what could only be described as a hole to open in the floor. Something swept her, and whatever that demon was attached to her, into a smoky, black void, taking the hideous creature with it. Everything got quiet. There was a smell of roses in the air. Then the lights came back on. A fan in the restroom made a loud vibrating sound as it hung directly over my head on the ceiling. I could once again hear life echoing through the train station outside. I slowly stood up, picking up my purse and my phone, as though I were on autopilot, and I walked towards the door and opened it. Two women in mid-conversation nearly ran into me on my way out, and I took a deep breath. The station was no longer bare as it had been before. People were walking around, talking to each other. They were on their phones. Others were reading in the waiting areas. And then my phone rang, and it was deafening. I saw it was my mom and answered it without even saying hello. Tears still staining my cheeks as I forced myself to maintain calm while I tried to figure out what to say. My mother spoke before I could. "I tried to reach you before you got to the train station." My mother's voice sounded raspy, as though she had been crying. However, even in my perplexed state, I already knew what she was going to tell me. "Julie passed away last night. They said she was found with a pill bottle in her hand. Only, they don't know how she got it. They think one of her junkie friends snuck it in the rehab." My mom began sobbing again, and I listened to her as I slumped into a line on a bench at the end of the terminal. I now only had my necklace. Only, strangely enough, I had two on. The pieces seemed to be conjoined as I looked down, making one heart that spelled sisters.